There was a piece on 60 Minutes a few weeks back about an Air Force base where there was a huge cheating scandal. And the deal is that in the Air Force, you are required to periodically take these tests. And if the system was such that your promotions were absolutely linked to how you scored on these tests, and that if you did not get a perfect score on every test, you very well may not get promoted. That's messed up. Sorry, judgment. But it's not life-affirming. Any rate, so they interviewed these young junior officers, and it was like you could just see that this isn't what they wanted to do. I mean, honor, courage, commitment, that gets drilled into you all the way back into basic training. So essentially, in order for them to have any chance at all to advance in rank, which means more pay and everything that goes with that, they had to cheat. And you really got that they weren't okay with that, and they would just, I have no choice. Yeah, perfectionism is not helpful. So the Navy, while I was in the Navy, we had an evaluation system, and it was based on a 4.0 scale. Well, by the time I was in, if you wanted to get promoted, you couldn't get less than, we used to call it 2 block to the left, because perfect score was on the left 4.0. But no, that wasn't enough. You had to have secret code words in your evaluations. For example, if I were to say, I recommend Larry for this new job, right? Everyone would say, that's a good thing, right? No, that's really saying, I don't recommend Larry for this job, but I don't have a good reason not to recommend him. So I'll say, I strongly recommend Larry for this job. So that sounds even better, right? Well, what that really meant is that, yeah, I recommend Larry. He'd be okay. Now, if I really want to recommend Larry, in naval parlance of the day, I had to say, I most strongly recommend. It's nuts. So, well, I was in the Navy. They said, this is ridiculous. And so they threw out their entire evaluation system. They said, we're going to do it all different because there's no such thing as a perfect sailor. No kidding. And so they, instead of a 4-point scale, it was a 5-point scale. Instead of the perfect score being on the left, it was now on the right. And the chief of naval operations came out and said, if you mark someone as a 5.0 sailor, you better be able to justify da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, we're going, cool, this is great. Maybe it'll make a difference. It lasted about a year. And then there just became a whole new set of ways to game the system. And again, the gaming the system piece was on the supervisors. So if I wanted to do right by my sailors, I had to make sure I knew all the secret handshakes and decoder rings and all that stuff so that I said the right things to make sure that their values. So 5.0 sailors, like I said, within a year and a half, 2 years, there were 5.0 sailors again. And what that says is that you can change the outward appearance. You can throw out the book and try to write a new book, but the problem is, until your consciousness changes, no matter what you do on the outside isn't going to make a difference. And I thought that was interesting because perfectionism, that's what we talked about last week, and I maybe even overstated the point about how unhelpful the idea of perfectionism is. It's not about being flawless. We talked about that Even a beautiful diamond has a flaw. A diamond without a flaw does not exist in nature. Huh. Perfectionism is not about accuracy, because is there really absolute perfect? Yeah, and Joseph's back there saying, I'm about to give him credit for something. Because I went back, yesterday I was last Sunday taking off my mic, and he says, he was telling a story about having to learn something and being very precise about it. And someone accused him of being a perfectionist, and he said, no, I'm not a perfectionist, I'm a precisionist. I like that. I like that. Because what you're saying is that attention to detail is really important. And face it, there are some jobs that's really important. Larry's an optometrist, and he's got his little gadget machine, and if he doesn't have everything dialed in, and they go this way and flips this way and does all this and that, and I don't know how he keeps track of all of that, but the truth of the matter is, if he gets it wrong, I can't see right. And so I want him to be a precisionist. So perfectionism isn't what it may appear to be or what we tell ourselves it is. It is a false idea. In nature, on this earth plane, it does not exist if you want to talk about it being without any flaw at all. Doesn't exist. So instead, perfectionism becomes a prison. It's a prison of attachment. We use the idea of perfectionism to play small. We use the idea of perfectionism to judge other people. There was just another mass shooting yesterday. And yet again, the person who is alleged to have done this was another instance of someone who was being bullied and being told that he was a piece of garbage and getting all of these negative messages. I don't even know what to say about that, because that is just so unloving. It is so destructive. And yet people feel a need to judge and criticize and make other people wrong because they want to feel better about themselves. Perfectionism is also about a need to control. And what are we controlling? We're controlling other people's opinions of us, but we're also controlling our opinion of ourselves. And that's kind of a negative thing, at least from my experience, is that I then can use it as a way to beat up on myself because I'm not reaching this ungodly standard. And yeah, I said ungodly because that standard is not a standard that God promotes. Perfectionism takes us out of life. It takes us out of the present moment. It limits us. And at the end of the day, it is fear-based. Think about it. If you are striving and you think you've got to have it perfect, you got to have it right, you got to do this, what's driving that? A fear of not being that, yes? We are driven by the fear of not living up to some of these standards, not living up to the airbrushed Photoshop pictures that you see on the front of the magazines. We have this put in front of us, and from a place of fear, we strive. It's like the hamster wheel. minister friend of mine who calls it the wheel of misfortune, because you just keep running and running and running and running, and you never get there, and all you get is tired. Or you get in a place where these young Air Force officers, they were forced to compromise their integrity because the system was set up in an unreasonable way. They didn't want to compromise their integrity. It was their only choice. Great, right? What a wonderful lesson. Driven by fear. The last thing that's an issue with perfectionism is the idea that if you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep pushing, I know for me, then I can say, look what I did. Look what I did. I did it right. I did it perfect. Yeah, look at me. That's right, I'm bad. So as soon as I do that, I am coming from the little I am. And I am limiting myself. I am limiting myself. So what's the answer? We've identified the fact that we have this idea of perfection that is not attainable. And we make ourselves crazy trying to go there. We harm ourselves and others by looking at these standards and judging. And ultimately, it's all about fear. Now, there's all kinds of acronyms for fear. The one that I learned first and the one that I tend to remember is false evidence appearing real. Well, I think it really applies because the false evidence is that perfection is without flaw, perfection is without any error, that it's actually something that we can achieve by way of skill and doing. That's false evidence, and it appears real because we have all the messages that get thrown in our face all the time that says that, you know, take this pill, use this cosmetic, drink this water, whatever, and you're going to be more perfect. In 1 John chapter 4, it reads, God is love. So we've heard that one a lot, right? God is love. But it goes on. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. So when I said ungodly standard, I meant that it is an unloving standard. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. But it goes on. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Perfect love drives out fear. Goes on. Because fear has to do with punishment. Duh! Right? Aren't we fearful of bad things happening? Isn't that the thing we get fearful about the most, is that something bad is going to happen? Fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So if you are living in a constant fearful state of not being enough, of not doing enough, of not having enough, anyone know any of these? It's crazy making. It is crazy making. Perfect love drives out fear. What does that mean to me? It all comes back to loving what is and loving what is not, which comes to being okay with things as they are and things as they are not. Being at peace with things as they are and things as they are not. And releasing attachment. Number one, because, like I said, the Buddhists got it right. Attachment. And the longer I am in metaphysics and the more various approaches that I study, it all comes back to a couple of very simple ideas. One is when you get too attached to anything, it becomes a prison. It limits you. It holds you back. Even good stuff. If you get too attached to good stuff, you're shutting the door on better stuff. I want better stuff, don't you? So Jesse Jennings always talks about letting go of the good for the better. I love that. The other thing that comes down to is separation. That when we feel that we are separate from each other and from God, and it's actually the same thing, when we feel like we are on our own, no man is an island, it's true. No man is an island apart with himself. I love that quote, because it's true. It's impossible. We were designed to be in relationship with other people. We were designed to interact. We were designed to give and receive. We were designed to be a thread in a tapestry. Now, a few years ago, when I was still kind of new up here, I was still exploring things. I got this great idea that I wanted to go rafting on the American River with my dogs. Now, I had been whitewater rafting, and so that was a weird experience for me to be in this river that all of a sudden would, turn into this very turbulent experience. So I'd already been down, I knew. And of course, you kind of wonder when they've got such names as, they give them the various rapid places names. One of my personal favorites was Satan's Cesspool. Yeah, I know. So I get this great idea, and I want to go out on the American River, and I want to go rafting with my dogs. And so I got a great deal on a raft at Big 5. I got life vests for me and the dogs. So we're all tricked out and go down to Lotus Park, and I get out in my raft. And the current starts to carry me. And so I try to put my oars in the water, and my oars didn't reach. I couldn't, or if I leaned all the way over one way, I could get one in, but I couldn't get them both in. It was physically impossible for me to do that. So then along comes the current, and down the river I go. And then I hit, there's a little rapid, just a little ways down, and I hit that, and I realize that I have zero control. Rob, my Sheltie, he's just kind of curled up in the bottom. Jackson wants out. Get me out of this thing. And I am feeling completely and totally powerless and helpless. I don't scare easily, but boy, I tell you, I had zero control. And I knew Satan's Cesspool was down the way. And I knew that was not going to be good for us. Well, I managed to get the raft up on a rock in the middle of that little rapid. And I'm looking around, there's rapid, I'm a ways from the shore. And all I will tell you is that there, but for the grace of God, I made my way to the shore, and we were safe. And as I was walking back up to the park along the way, well, before, as I was getting the raft over, there was an eagle feather in the water. And on the way walking back up to the park, I saw a couple of deer as I was walking with Jackson and Robert up there. And I knew that there had been divine intervention. And what that leads me to is the idea of grace. Because grace is the cure for perfectionism. Love and grace. And I'm not talking about what you say before you eat your meal. What? That was funny. You know, say grace before your meal? Right? Okay, all right. Okay, we'll strike that one. The Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, he tells a story about how he was, doing his thing and thought everything was great, and then he found thorns in his side. And so he prayed. We teach that when we're encountering a difficulty, we pray, right? And so he prayed for the thorns to be removed. And as he tells the story, Jesus said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. What does that mean? What it means to me is that sometimes, and some of us have to be pushed farther than others, some of us who can be very self-sufficient and independent, like me, I think sometimes we have to be pushed a little farther to reach the place of recognizing that I can't fix this, I can't do anything, I'm in over my head. My grace is sufficient. Now, grace isn't something we earn. Dictionary says it is something that comes to us independent of having worthy or deserving or anything. We don't earn it. It is. And it is all around. The Hindu prophet, it's Ramakrishna, says the winds of God's grace are always blowing. It is up to us to raise our sails. The winds of God are always blowing, the grace of God. It is up to us to raise our sails. So it is already there. And sometimes some of us have to be pushed a ways before we raise our sails and say, perfect love casts out fear. My power is made perfect in weakness. And in fact, the last part of that passage, the Apostle Paul says, "For when I am weak, I am strong." Perfectionism is an illusion. It's something we torture ourselves with. We take ourselves out of life and out of love. We shut the door on any sort of allowing any other kind of support grace of God shows up in all kinds of ways. It can show up as a friendly current. It can show up as a friend. It can show up in a book. There are all kinds of ways that the grace of God shows up for us. And the beauty of it is that we do not have to seek it. All we have to do is allow it. So it's not about this endless quest to find the right speaker, the right book, the right workshop, the whatever. That's perfectionism too. You know, even as metaphysicians and spiritual seekers, we can sabotage ourselves by telling ourselves that we haven't found the right thing that is going to propel us into some new dimension of being. First of all, where we are right now is fine, is perfect. Not because it is without flaw, not because it is 100% accurate, because it is what it is. We're the ones that screw it up when we try to put our noses and our words and our hands and our thoughts where they don't belong. We're the ones who screw it up. Gave the example of a mountain. What is a perfect mountain? Oh, by the way. And every one of them has a crag or whatever that could be considered a flaw. But no, you take a step back and it's beautiful. And it's perfect. So perfection is imperfection. Perfection is being okay with those things that appear to be flawed or even inaccurate. And just release the attachment to something or someone, including ourselves, having to be a certain way, do a certain thing, dress a certain way. What if we all allowed live and let live, yeah? Then there would be no bullying. There would be none of these messages that says we're not enough. Alice Bandy, Reverend Alice Bandy, Reverend Dr. Alice Bandy actually, has been in our movement for a number of years. And this is what she writes about grace. And I really like this. When we're living in grace, all goes smoothly. Events happen effortlessly. Old angers and resentments just dissolve. Everything unfolds seamlessly, and we need to do nothing to make this happen. We need to do nothing. Where do I sign up for that? Well, guess what? I'm already signed up. But I forget it sometimes. My grace is sufficient. Everything that I need is already there and comes into form and experience at the absolute perfect time. There are a lot of people who point to some of the music of the Beatles as being really mystical, you know, and at first I went, yeah, right. But you know, think about it. And the song I'm going to mention right now is called Let It Be. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. So what if we could do that? What if we can just simply let things be? What Reverend Alice described as things happening effortlessly. In fact, all goes smoothly. Anger and resentment dissolves. I would sum that up by saying, when we are living in the flow, in the zone. Some people call it in the zone, when things just fall together. Now, I guarantee you, from my experience, I have never been in the zone while I was fretting about it, or when I was struggling with it, or if I was efforting with it. Never got me there. It was when I threw up my hands in frustration and letting go, or just said, you know what, it is what it is, until it's not. Then I'm in the flow. Then all of a sudden, I'm not stubbing my toe and hitting rocks all the time, because I am just letting it be. Letting it be. Because when I'm letting it be, I'm not stuck in the prison of perfectionism. I'm not measuring against an ungodly, unloving standard. The standard is love. What would love do here? I ask myself that question a lot, and more. What would love do here? Because the answer to that question has nothing to do with beating up on ourselves or judging other people or forcing things or just any of those thoughts and activities that are harmful and hurtful to ourselves and others. So yes, it is words of wisdom. Let it be. And that's why when I end my affirmative prayers, most of the time, the last thing I say is I let go, I let God, and I let it be. I release attachment. I open myself for the limitless ways that God is right there to support me. I raise my sail to the winds of grace that are always blowing. And then I just let it be. Let it be. Let go, let God, let it be. Let's pray.